Well, welcome to tonight's BR313 Symposium. It's been a while for lots of reasons. We've been all busy doing other things. And we're coming back to a special one tonight. Myself and Jason are here with Siofra O'Donovan. Now, Siofra is a woman who came to my attention about a month or so ago when I was actually looking at one of the Carl Jung Facebook pages, and she wrote something which I found very insightful and interesting. And then I just started looking at her own page, and there's a woman had a lot of things to say about a subject I've wanted to talk about on the symposium since the day we started this show, but there was no one ever was around that could talk about it until tonight. So I'm very happy.
Yay.
So basically, we're going to talk about Joseph Campbell. Broadly, we might branch off into a few other things, but Joseph Campbell, the concept of the hero's journey, the monomyth, and all the things you've heard me talking about over the years with Siofra, who is quite an expert on this and quite insightful on how she writes and talks about it. So Siofra O'Donovan, welcome to the Beyond Room 313 Symposium.
Thanks a million. Yeah, it's brilliant to be here. Thank you, Thomas and Jason.
Now, the first question I'd like to ask you is, how did Joseph Campbell's work enter into your life?
Well, I don't know if the year is on this book, but here is my copy of The Hero with a Thousand Faces, which is very, very used. I think I got it in something like 1996 or something, maybe even earlier. But I didn't really delve into it that much until I started writing a children's story called Baba Yaga and the Dreamers, and wrote it in an attic in Norway in the middle of nowhere. And then I decided to write that as a script. And when I wrote it as a script, my friend Sally Ann, who was a script editor, said, you need to use this as a template. And then I realized the dots started connecting. And I was actually living in India, in Varanasi at the time. And it was a really, really creative time. I was doing loads of stuff. But I started to realize how it all worked, how the monomyth worked, how that structure kind of underlay so much about life, the universe, and the many, many stories that we have within that.
When I first stumbled upon The Hero with a Thousand Faces, it was almost like a Pandora's box had been opened for me. I can remember suddenly stories that were just stories to me exploded in all kinds of new meanings and directions.
Yeah.
Did that happen to you?
Yeah, totally. Like you start to look at movies and novels and, stories that you've known in a completely different way, because you understand why they're so powerful and why they work and why those archetypes, like in character and in plot terms, work and how they activate certain things. And because I teach the hero's journey as a creative writing journey, it's just so powerful what happens when people sit in a group and write, but they're held by, a particular archetype,
Yeah.
whichever step of the hero's journey we're doing that week, and really powerful stuff happens. It just blows through from the unconscious to the conscious mind. It's amazing.
And then you're also reminded of when you had those experiences in your own life. I've had a conversation with Jason a few times that you cannot avoid these archetypal moments along the hero's journey, regardless of what situation you're in. It's the profound enlightenment of it is undeniable. It's undeniable. That's why it's great that you're here in Ireland teaching these courses, because I think a lot of people need this stuff. Ordinary people need this stuff because it has tremendous healing abilities.
Yeah, it has incredible healing abilities. I was really inspired when I heard that they teach the hero's journey as a kind of personal development thing in Nebraska Penitentiary. So my dream is to go into prisons and do this work. Now I've worked in prisons a lot, teaching writing, but I want to I'd like a really long stretch in a prison, because I find working with prisoners really fascinating, and you've so many guardians of the thresholds, and they've got their mentors in there, but it's such a different kind of reality. So yeah, it's such a tool for self-reflection, because people who do the courses, they go, oh yeah, sure, I'd love to write the screenplay or the novel, whatever, but actually as a tool for reflection on their own life, that's what becomes the most apparently important in the journey,
Siofra, have you ever had experience using it with people, presenting this material to therapists or counselors working with people like in marriage counseling or in personal counseling at all? You were talking about the prisoner thing, so it kind of reminded me of therapy as well.
Yeah, loads of people who come to courses are like, or can be, well, quite a few of them have been people who are involved in psychotherapy or whatever, or drama therapy. I've had a few like drama therapists as well. A friend of mine, Eva Linders, and she's a drama therapist from Sweden, and we used to teach a hero's journey thing in Maynooth University. So therapeutically, it works really, really well. There's a really cool thing going on in July run by somebody called Fergus, I think. I don't know if you've heard of it. The Fool's Gold people, they do a Gestalt thing, but it's like a whole experiential hero's journey thing for 7 days, which I've always wanted to do, but it never works in July for me.
No, it's been holidays. I first came across, I'm ashamed to say, I came across Joseph Campbell, not through the book, but through a TV show when I lived in America. He did this series of dialogues on public broadcasting there called Joseph Campbell and the Hero's Journey, or the Hero with 1,000 Faces, or something like that. It was a series of dialogues between him and Bill Moyers.
Oh, yeah, they're cool, yeah.
Well, back in the day, that was mind-blowing. That justified, you would never get something like that on TV today. But I always remember how, this is a kind of a double-edged sword as well. One of the reasons is I've had videos pulled down on YouTube because the George Lucasfilms has taken over the rights to so much of his work. So, but George Lucas was heavily inspired by the Hero of 1,000 Faces, who wrote a script for Star Wars, and that's why so many archetypes of previous films are in there. Now, we used to think like, okay, all George Lucas did was nick ideas from samurai movies, westerns, and British World War II movies like the Dam Busters, but there wasn't that. He didn't take the actual plots. They even made fun of him on The Simpsons for that. He didn't lift the plots from those films. He lifted the archetypes from them and brought them into a new reality. And that's, I think, the main reasons. You look at Star Wars, the movie was successful, not because it was a science fiction movie, but because it was a story of archetypes, from Han Solo to, it was the wizard was there, and that's, to me, is the real power of this stuff. Because inside all of us, there, depending on where you are in the hero's journey life, is the wizard, is the hero, is the jester, is this kind of thing. And I in these days, we need that stuff more than ever, with the incredible amounts of propaganda we're subject to on a constant rate.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I watched all of Star Wars with my son. He's now 15, but we just started watching yesterday The Lord of the Rings again, because I've missed that, and it really is a story for our time as well. But I was listening to your talk earlier on about Tolkien and how he hated Ireland.
No, he didn't hate Ireland. No, he thought the landscape had an evil energy in it.
He thought it, I've heard that before.
But he said it was the Irish people's spiritual depth that kept that evil at bay. Yeah. Which is really interesting, because you kind of almost expect Tolkien not to be so Catholic and be a bit more pagan because of his stories. But yeah, it's fascinating. Yes, I was. That's when the Irish Times, when they did that series on his letters about Ireland a few years back. I found that they put a headline on it, like what you just said, that he didn't like Ireland and the Irish. But when I read into it, it was just sensationalism. Yeah, he actually had a lot of fondness for the country.
No, but I did hear that he made a lot of money here. I thought that he didn't like people saying that he was inspired by Irish mythology, that he didn't like, for example, that Rivendell was from the Two-Headed Danann. Do you know what I mean?
Yes. No, the only thing you could say he probably lifted from Irish mythology was Gollum, from the cave of the Gollum down in County Clare, where when he was the language professor at University College Galway, there's a famous cave. I don't know if you know, it's in the Burren, called the Cave of the Gollum, and it's exactly similar to Gollum in Northeast. But no, he's always made the point, and there's nothing wrong with that he had no interest in Irish mythology, right? He was, or the Irish language even. He was strictly Anglo-Saxon, but he was also strictly British Celtic, which is very different than Irish Celtic. I mean, that's why there's so much, this like Elvish, so much Welsh in it. It wasn't because, you see, it's like, the Welsh are Celtic, whatever Celtic is, the Irish are Celtic, but the Welsh are not Gaelic. they're Brittonic. So it was that side of the cultural aspect is what Tolkien was interested in. He was sort of like a Brittonic nationalist in that way. And he was trying to restore the mythology of England that had been destroyed by the Normans with the harrying of the North and the Romans before that, which didn't affect Ireland for some reason. I don't know why. We kept their mythology. But no, that's what that was about. Well, yeah, he was kind of hostile when people would ask him about, like, why don't you study Irish mythology? And he says, well, I had no use for it or anything like that. So he's just being honest, I think. I just think we've been honest.
Yeah, yeah.
But you're right, Rivendell is always how I imagine what Tara looked like in its heyday.
Yeah, yeah.
Before St. Patrick's magical fire. And, you go to any archaeology course or anywhere, and they show Tara as like basically mud huts and a few straw houses. And we know by the footprints of the foundations of the buildings that were there, that they were colossal wooden structures. And I imagine very much like the stave churches in Norway, which we know that the Norwegian folklore says was a Celtic design brought here from people, people from Ireland and Scotland. So that was probably what they were like. But yeah, the thing with, back to Campbell again, you were talking about Tolkien, you're talking about the Lord of the Rings. You also cannot separate, I don't think you can separate Joseph Campbell from Carl Jung. There's so many similarities there. Do you have anything to say about that?
Just with the collective unconscious, but with I talk a lot in the hero's journey about, I find the meeting with the goddess a very important point in the journey. So I talk a lot about the anima and the animus within that, and the necessity for the hero not to simply be an outwardly driven, quest-driven person who's just trying to get the Grail, but also a person who has some kind of, inner wisdom and compassion, and those qualities, they have to be integrated for them to transform. And I guess, throughout the Hero with 1,000 Faces, Joseph Campbell's also, in a very Jungian way, giving case studies of people's dreams, which are fascinating, which reflect those parts of the journey, and we can all find those in our dreams, Go, what the hell was that about? Well, it makes sense when you put it into the context of a certain archetypal part of a journey, or, a certain kind of weird being that appears that, is something just from our unconscious, but it's mythic. So, like, I love the way Jung said that we each have our own inner mythology, and that we need to explore that. And that's why, like, I hate those dream books where they give just simplistic black and white explanations for what your dream. I don't believe anybody can know, not even a psychoanalyst can know what your dream means, only you can.
Now, you're preaching to the converted here, because we often have conversations on I wake up in the morning and I had a dream and it was about this. No, that's like saying one day of your life tells the entire story of every day of your life. One night of dreaming is part of it. A major thing. What is the just out of interest, what is the demographic of people who come to your courses? Like, would there be people who have been successful in life and they're looking for answers, or would there be a specific demographic that constantly shows up?
It is kind of fairly varied. I mean, there are actually a lot of kind of therapist people coming, but at the beginning, when I started all this, there were a lot of people in recovery, interestingly enough, and they were using it as a tool for self-reflection and sort of semi-therapeutically, not that I'd ever say I'm a therapist, but, it was working for them in that kind of way. I've also had like teenagers. I've had like really old people. I've had, all sorts, really, all sorts. Right. Yeah.
And would most of the people have any prior knowledge of Joseph Campbell, or would be totally new to them?
For some people, it is completely new, but some people come specifically because it's about, it's based on Campbell's work. But like you do get all sorts of people, and then you go into places like prisons. Like, I've done a bit of heroes journeys in prisons, but they just find that it works really well for them as a tool for self-reflection. But I really would love to do like a 12-week course, because in that way it kind of reflects that recovery plan, you know what I mean? The 12-step thing, the hero's journey, can work really well like that. But I'd like to teach it on all levels. I mean, all sorts of people have come, but I haven't had like many kind of script writers or anything like that. I'd love to have more of that as well. People who really want to use it in that way. But then, you got to be careful with using it like that, because it can be you can get too attached to the form and then it becomes formulaic. And that's happened, as we know, a lot in Hollywood.
Big time.
Yeah. It's so obvious.
Yeah. Well, as soon as George Lucas started telling people that he was inspired by Campbell.
And then Vogler took over.
Loads of movies started appearing like that with this story. The whole thing of the sacred object at the beginning, like a guy would find a cigarette lighter or something. Yeah. At the end of the movie, it would resolve itself as a story. And it kind of destroyed the Hollywood stories for a long time, I thought, because they were so formulaic.
Yeah.
Because George Lucas made tons of money with his concepts. Let's try and do that. But that was really, even in comedy movies, they would have that kind of energy. Like I remember, Trading Places with Eddie Murphy is very much about the whole hero. Even though it's one of my favorite movies, he's a homeless person. Dan Aykroyd plays a snobby person. One is raised up and one is fallen down, both artificially, and they sort of meet each other at the hero's ascent and the hero's descent at the same time, until they both reach a kind of a rock bottom and a realization. It's a very deep film when you get into it, Trading Places, and then they begin their restoration as the men they're supposed to be. And I think that's actually, that I've often found that's what the gift of that kind of Campbell-esque and Jungian concept is. It allows you to become the person you're meant to be, not the socially conditioned story, narrative. And that can be a beautiful thing for a person when they actually find that, when they come out of it, like a marriage that's failed, or like you said, out of prison or something. I find that can be an incredibly healing thing. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, that kind of story, the Trading Places, reminds me a bit of The Fisher King as well, with Robin Williams and Jeff Bridges.
Yep. You were saying there about the Grail. I'm glad you brought that up. I'm currently working on a project here on 313, a film on our own versions of what Atlantis is. You mentioned the two of the Danann there earlier on. The 4 treasures of Ireland that they brought from the destroyed homeland are nearly all the same as the Grail treasures of the Grail mysteries. You have the Spear of Lu, the Spear of Destiny. You have the Stone of the Leofal, that's Excalibur. You have the Sword of Light, Excalibur. And you have the Cauldron of the Dagda, and that's the Holy Grail.
Yeah.
And at the time of the Normans, these stories were written down in Ireland and made their way to England to be picked up by Geoffrey of Monmouth, who incorporated those stories. And then you had the story of Parsifal in France. But I find that fascinating, that this ancient thing of these 4 treasures, wherever the hell that comes from, made its way into what eventually became the European esoteric and mystery tradition. The 4 species of tarot and so on. Do you have you an interest in the tarot? Do you do any of that stuff?
Not so much, but I'm really interested in what you're just saying there about Geoffrey of Monmouth, because I've written a novel which is set in the 12th century, and it's about Eleanor of Aquitaine's daughter with Louis VII. So Eleanor of Aquitaine's daughter, Marie de Champagne, she and Eleanor, once Eleanor was in Poitiers, in Aquitaine, in that court, and they started working with, Chrétien Latour, and started the first writings of these stories, these Arthurian stories. And so I find, and the courts of love and all of that, I find absolutely fascinating. And then it has all of these Celtic undertones and backgrounds and origins, as you say. And I love Joseph Campbell's book as well about the Romance of the Grail. I think it's called The Romance of the Grail. You know that book?
Romance of the Grail, yeah.
Anne
Boleyn, I believe, came from that bloodline as well. When you think about her later effects on the world, basically, she probably most hated woman in the Catholic or Christendom at one time, because she basically led, well, not her fault, but through her marriage to Henry VIII. I just find it amazing that she was always called a witch, that she came from witch blood, and was probably from that lineage.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, because back in the Plantagenet line, you have this ancestor of theirs who was it Melusina or something like that, and she was supposed to be a witch, and that she couldn't take the Eucharist in the Mass. She kept flying out the window or something. Yeah. It's really interesting. And there was elements of that with Eleanor of Aquitaine as well. The way, she led the rebellion against her own husband, Henry II. with her sons, Richard the Lionheart, etc. And then she gets locked up for 16 years and they get away with it.
Yep. That's what the world was like back then. Sure, look at Henry VIII, how he dealt with his own marital crises. You know, I mean, when I look at these people in power, when I see it, like not only Henry VIII, but the Bill Gates of today and individuals like that. Klaus Schwab. I see people who have not undergone the hero's journey, and they've become some kind of distorted anti-human. I don't mean that in like they're subhuman or anything like that or different. I mean their actual consciousness no longer relates to the massive humanity, and therefore they attempt to like a kind of a Sauron type thing. They attempt to distort or twist humanity to their way, to their own functionality, rather than them adapting themselves to the monomyth. You know what I'm saying? I don't know if I was saying that correctly, but you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, they definitely don't seem to have undergone anything that would transform them on the inside at all. They seem to be completely almost one-dimensional people. I mean, if you look at Klaus Schwab, he looks like something out of Star Wars. It's a joke. It's hard to take even seriously, but apparently it is very serious.
Well, the new Star Wars stories are extremely sinister, as are many of the Marvel and DC recent movies. There's a definite desire to destroy these archetypes that are very much rooted in the Western traditions. You have, like, in Star Wars, so Han Solo, who becomes the kind of redemptive, the kind of buccaneer, kind of like gangster. He becomes redemptive at the end of the initial Star Wars film by joining them and attacking the Death Star. And he holds, what's the word? He protects Luke when Luke goes in to destroy it. So he redeems himself of being a, Chewbacca as his consciousness. He redeems himself. Yeah. In the recent films, he's an alcoholic and, who meets a grisly end. The same with Luke Skywalker. He's on Craggy Island and he's a mess. And these, and I think these, and they've both been replaced by kind of like, I don't know if you, it's just one that really annoys me. Okay. Yes, we know the archetype of the warrior female is real. Of course, that kind of Joan of Arc.
Yeah.
We know that's real. But we know that that's not the full story. If they were complex people who were brought to these points through their own monomyth. These female role models in the likes of the DC and the Marvel and the Star Wars films today are extremely one-dimensional. They're like, we're going to kick ass. But you don't get any insight into what made them what they are. Do you ever notice that? They're just like, they're like the women who work in human resources in corporate buildings. It's like, that kind of thing. And
there's no.
You heard the latest the Lord of the Rings TV series when they're doing the Galadriel.
I heard.
They've turned her into a Laura Croft.
Yeah.
This is like taking the Virgin Mary and turning her into, I don't know, like Wonder Woman.
Well, then it's surely the people who are creating these characters and who are writing these characters are totally one-dimensional themselves. They're not capable of doing anything else. When if you can reduce Galadriel to, a Lara Croft, you don't know what you're doing. No. You don't understand the story at all.
And they've hired they've made up all these fake superfan sites where they're not these people that obviously don't know anything about the lore. And it's like, my girlfriend, Galadriel, yeah, go girl. I'm like, what? It's like I said, they're either out to deliberately destroy it, which I think they're to a point, many of them are, because they don't like that's a stepping stone between transhuman, us and them and their transhumanist dreams is these archetypes. I really do believe that. They get a bit conspiratorial about it. They want us to have the sort of consciousness level of an Instagram or TikTok influencer. They don't want us to have which is what when you look at like the characters in Marvel films now, that's what they're like. They're more like Instagram or TikTok influencers than superheroes.
Yeah.
So I think there's a deliberate like annihilation going on at some levels too.
Yeah. But even if you look at the more recent films made about Arthur, I mean, they're very superficial and they're quite violent and they're not that interesting.
Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's real similar to what you were talking about on Monday, Thomas, with the iconoclasts. It seems like we've got a kind of a modern era of iconoclasts going through our culture, especially through film and TV. and they've got this idea of almost, it seems like they're almost afraid of mythology and afraid of people being able to discover archetypal resonance within themselves. So they're deliberately creating this kind of post-humanist future where, you know, we've got characters based on Instagram influencers and social media influencers, and not even teaching young people, teaching kids the concept of the hero's journey or of the monomyth. But it's like there's this destruction of what it means to be human. So like you're both saying, you know, going forward into the future with these characters out there that have not been through their own personal monomyth, they end up kind of turning into some scale of a Klaus Schwab type. That, you know, they end up becoming something almost not human.
Yep, and famous for nothing and no effort put in, really. When I lived in New York, I used to work with a lot of people who are trying to break into Broadway shows, both males and females. And if you saw the work that these people put in, especially people who are dancers and things like that, they're trying to get into like some West Side Story or something on Broadway, the amount of dejection that they would get, the lack of callbacks, you know, they would go for rehearsal after rehearsal, and they never, ever, ever stopped trying as long as they could. But if they were lucky enough and did end up on something like a Broadway show as a dancer, as even an actor, they would have really struggled and fought really hard to get there. So they have that hero's journey to the stage.
Yeah.
If you're something like someone who's like famous for nothing, you'll be one-dimensional, just like I said.
Absolutely, yeah.
I've noticed too that it becomes more about political correctness and political statements than it does mythology anymore. Like we no longer have comedy anymore. We just have politically correct woke propaganda, and we don't have, you know, like you guys were both talking about the Lord of the Rings earlier. We don't have mythology in that anymore. It's politicized. Everything has become so political. So it's like rather than having, you know, Joseph Campbell's monomyth, you've got people making these stories, writing these scripts about social justice and all these concepts in there. Like it's just we've gotten away from even the formula of the hero's journey that was there for a while. I would say up until like the mid 2000s, and then since I want to say maybe like 2013, 2015 onward, the formula for screenwriting is just politically correct wokeness put forward without that old formula even more anymore.
But still a few gems strip through. Like, have you seen Kubo and the Two Strings, that animated thing? That's a father-son story, a little Japanese tale about a boy looking for his samurai father who's probably dead, but so much magic comes into that. And it actually follows the steps of the hero's journey. This came out, I'd say, 2017, but had a very short life in the cinemas. But we caught it and we got the DVD, and it's absolutely beautiful. The animation, it's beautiful. All this incredible origami, like, you know, animated. And the belly of the whale scene, that he's actually in the belly of a whale with one of his mentors. It's absolutely stunning. Like, but that didn't do very well, of course.
No. Have you seen The Northman?
No.
It's fantastic. It's absolutely. It's like it's a kind of a very gritty version of Lord. It's Lord of the Rings without Tolkien's Blake-esque English Christianity, you know, overstory. But my God, I was quite taken back by how not only they left Robert Eggers left the Icelandic sagas alone, but in their grittiness left them for what they were, but also the sheer amount of shamanistic type magic. There's one phenomenal scene where he enters into the underworld to collect. He has to basically kill a demon to get the Ulfrith sword that he needs to go on his rest of his journey. It's tremendous. It was like, no, this is why people are raving about it. And it's also why people are slagging it off. There's many people, like you said, who are one-dimensional these days that can't relate to this concept of struggle towards survival.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you find do you ever have people when you come in, their Christianity or their religion might act as a barrier sometimes to you, working with them?
No, I seem to naturally attract people who are very much away from the church.
Good, yeah.
It just has happened like that. But I was teaching a different kind of a workshop once, a memoir workshop, and there was a nun on it. And she happened to know my dad's cousin, who's a hermit monk in Australia. So that was interesting. I'm not against the Catholic Church as place for people to go and worship. It's just, as we know, the other things that have happened within it. And I think Joseph Campbell speaks really interesting about the Catholic Church, because whilst he's not in it and he's explored literally every other tradition on the planet, he's got respect for, you know, the rituals and for the mythology of it. You know, he understands it for what it is, but he, as he says, like they're taking it literally. They're not really fully understanding what this means as a mythology. They're taking it in a one-dimensional way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you'd lived in India for a while. Did you have any remarkable experiences there you could share with us?
Yeah, definitely. That was the hero's journey of my life, really. Well, when I was in my final year in college here, I was in UCD, I was doing English and history of art, but I thought I better learn to meditate or I'd get really stressed out for my finals. So my sister, who was always my godmother and my spiritual guide in a way, she actually died a couple of years ago, but she had this knack of telling me, what about this? And she said it very, very casually, and then it would like change my life. So anyway, she said there was this Buddhist center up in Cavan, and why didn't I go up there and learn to meditate? So that's literally what I did. I went up there and learned to meditate, but didn't expect that I would meet a Tibetan Lama. Didn't know it was a Tibetan Buddhist center. And so that kind of definitely changed the course of my life. I was in my final year in college and I got a green card for America just around that time, and everybody went to America and I went, no, I'm going to go to Poland. So that changed everything. But sorry, what was the question? Oh yeah, so India.
Before you go there, where did you study in Ireland?
Oh, I studied in UCD, which I didn't really like, but the English department was absolutely amazing at the time. It like amazing people in it. But I hated UCD. I hated the campus. I went to do the H-dip there, hated it again. Hung out in NCAD most of the time when I was studying. But later I went and did MA in London in the School of Oriental and African Studies. I did Tibetan language and Buddhist philosophy and stuff. But that was good for years later. Didn't like London either, and the college was fine, you know. I mean, I couldn't have done here, obviously, those studies. But anyway, that Lama in Cavan, long and short of it is, I went to Poland to work after college. I worked in universities, but he sent me to India. So that was my hero's journey, like from the age of kind of 23, 24. He said, okay, you're good at languages. You're going to go to India and you're going to study to be a translator for me. I was like, oh, and I was great. It was delighted to have an excuse to go to India because I kind of wanted to go anyway. I very much wanted to go. So I ended up in Dharamsala studying there, and I got bored in Dharamsala and didn't really like my teacher, who's just like, you know, Tibetans, monks teaching by rote, and I just got bored. So I went up the Himalayas and I stayed in monasteries, and there was a time of my life, met amazing people, hung out with the kings of the valleys and all sorts of things. It was just amazing. So that was definitely a hero's journey. And then I wrote a book about that, which is called Pema and the Yak, which came to me in a dream. A lot of my work comes to me in dreams, but it was the sort of overriding narrative arc of the story is searching for Shambhala, you know, the hidden kingdom of the north. So where all the sages and rishis are staying in a sort of Atlantis-like place. And so I was kind of, obviously, like I wasn't totally serious about finding Shambhala, but I just kept going further and further into the mountains. I never went to Tibet though, because I don't want to go there while the Chinese occupy it. But anyway, so I didn't become a translator because I got a bit freaked out. I thought I'd have to become a nun or something. And, you know, in that tradition, like if you're asked to be a translator, you'd have to hang out with the Lama literally not 24/7, but a lot. So I decided that I would learn the language anyway. And then I started collecting stories from all these people up in the villages on the Tibetan border, and collecting stories about like witches and demons and fairies and doing kind of folklore thing. But I was also at the same time collecting stories of Tibetan exiles and what their experiences were. But so all of this came together in one book, which I ended up publishing in India.
Is that book available now or in here? Can we get it?
It's not available as an actual book. It's now on Amazon Kindle, and it's called Lost in Shambhala.
Lost in Shambhala. Do you believe that? I'm definitely going to read that. Did you find that there's like, you know, like Plato's Atlantis myth, that there's also some truth to the Shambhala thing? Do you think there was like an actual place?
Yeah, definitely. Because like if you look, there's these really great, you know, the old Buddhist teachers like Atisha, who he said, I brought the Kala Chakra teaching from Shambhala. He just says it matter of factly, you know. There's some really fascinating books written about Shambhala. There's one by Nicholas Roerich, who also did incredible journeys from Russia, through Mongolia and into Tibet. And he's written a book called Shambhala, which is fascinating. And he has experiences of meeting people on the mountain roads who are definitely, he figured they were coming from Shambhala. But it's all about, you know, your ability to see. And a fascinating thing about Tibetans coming into exile in 1959 is that a lot of the lamas and rinpoches and monks and nuns have attested to being guided by ravens, because they could read raven talk and messages, right? And they were guided into what they call Beilung, which are like our Tirnanog, but they're not really Tirnanog either. They're just hidden lands and they're undiscovered. So the really great Buddhist tantric teacher, Padmasambhava, who brought Buddhism to Tibet, he was amazing at opening these Beilung, these hidden lands, and they would become sacred places of Padmasambhava. And some of them remain hidden. He also hid all these teachings in trees and rocks and stones when there was the second wave before the second wave of Buddhism that spread in Tibet. Because they were doing the same thing as the Christians. They were also converting people from Bon to Buddhism. You know what I mean? But anyway, he hid these teachings within rocks and things. And so there's he and Yeshit Tsogil, his consort. So then there were lamas who were later, centuries later, able to go, okay, I can see this one here. I'm going to download this one, you know? And then they would say, this is from Padmasambhava's lineage, which is incredible.
You must have had some remarkable familiarities then, because you're describing the Celtic or the Gaelic otherworld there when you're talking about these hidden places that are being led by ravens. We know the ravens are such a huge part of Indo-European spirituality. Totally. So you must have been totally struck by, this sounds like this story in Irish mythology or that story. I bet that happened all the time.
Yeah, especially when I was living in a village called Dankar, which is right up on a craggy rock. There's a monastery, and I was staying there for about 4 or 5 months. And so I'd go down to the villages in the evenings with my teacher, and we'd sit around these little chogsay tables on the mud floors, and we'd drink arak, but it was really disgusting. So I learned to kind of throw it underneath the table because it would make me really sick. But it's just a kind of a potent barley drink, whatever. Anyway, I would sit around, and because I was learning the language and I was understanding more, and they understood that I could understand, it was all really exciting because there was communication, and they'd open the doors more and more. So then they tell you the story. Oh, last winter there was this old Bangmo, the witch, and they describe her, and it was the archetypal witch they were describing. And she hangs out on that bridge there, and she brought sickness to that house up there, and you see it's all completely broken down, and nobody lives there because the whole family died because that witch put a curse on them. And then there was this fireball thing they describe, that the fireball would go into the houses, and it would take the spirit, would enter a young girl, she'd go crazy, then have to throw her out, and there's so much. And I thought, well, this is how we were living prior to electrification, television, blah, blah, blah. We were living in that dream time. We were communicating with that, but they were living that. And the other thing was that even superficially, these women, especially the women, they were wearing what they call the tilbu on the back, the basket. They were collecting dung for the fires, and they were wearing shawls, and they looked like the women of Aaron. And I was just like, Jesus, I'm connecting with something here, archetypally, but also culturally. This is simple, actually. It's not that Ireland has any great connection with Tibet or Tibetan culture. It's that we're all on that level, when we're that connected to the land and the folklore, we're the same.
Yeah, did you ever?
That's back to the Jungian thing. It's like the collective unconscious,
Yeah, they even have round towers in that part of the world, I believe. There are similar to our ones. Someone has told me about. It's very interesting how it all.
Well, what they have is those cairns. Those things, you can see them in Donegal where they leave stones, and you do a pilgrimage and you go to that place. They have that all over the Himalayas.
Right.
Yeah.
So interesting. That must have been, that was an incredible experience to have so young in your life.
Yeah, it was amazing.
It set you up so well for the rest of your life. Really, you're very fortunate in that sense. What years was this now? Like the late 80s, early 90s or something?
No, it's like 97. I went out there first, and then went out. I'd basically come back, and I'd live on either Poland or somewhere else in Europe or here. I was pretty confused with my identity because I was not really any one place over that long. But anyway, every couple of years I'd go for 6 months, or every year I'd go for 6 months. And this went on till about, I don't know, 2001 or 2 or so. And then I haven't done like that much being in the Himalayas really since that time, really 2003 when I was doing the MA in London. That was the last time really. I really want to go back.
Yeah, I had a similar experience in Sri Lanka, and I really want to go back to as well for the same reasons.
Yeah.
It's the same familiarity hit me like a ton of bricks as well while I was there. It's just bizarre.
Yeah.
But you have Timony, who's one of the other hosts on the show, and she talks about Jason those Native Americans that she visits down in, I think it's what you say was Arizona somewhere, and she said they're so similar to what you kind of people you'd meet in Ireland, like rural Ireland. You know, so it's
in New Mexico, yeah.
So the archetypes are they're undeniable. I think that's what makes selling, selling the concept of the monomyth and the archetypes to people so easy, because you cannot deny the comparisons. You just can't. There's no way.
Yeah, but it's an incredible feeling, like you in Sri Lanka or whatever, and me in Spiti Valley, or being somewhere, with Native Americans. It's incredibly deep resonance. Like you really go, whoa, this is absolutely amazing. I sort of understand more who I am when I'm here, although I'm not in my own land,
It's the whole thing of that the image of yourself is completely stripped away. And I imagine it's the same for people in the military, Jason, that the basic training strips away all your previous programming and bullshit, and it brings you down to who you're like really are. Yeah. And that will show up on the battlefield or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was just about to say, that the hero's journey of going through the military, even if it's just for one enlistment, or if you make a career out of it, but that initial departure when you go away to basic training, it's a reprogramming, and then you eventually do, once you get out of the military and reintegrate your personality back into you. That's another hero's journey in and of itself. You can, I would imagine the hero's journey in the monomyth would be something tremendously helpful for veterans who are either have just done one tour of duty or are retiring after 20 plus years. It would be something very beneficial for them for being able to integrate their life back into the civilian world, because so many veterans struggle with that ability. A lot of them will go into similar career fields to be able to still keep going on the same path without having to really fully integrate. So a lot will become law enforcement or do contract work. But there's a lot of people who just really, really struggle and go into tremendous depression within the first 5-7 years of getting out of the military, just because their own personality, they struggle bringing that back in. So it's almost like this constant state of dissociation that a lot of veterans go into, and people, they become alcoholics or drug addicts or homeless or dead and suicide, so that kind of thing. So I'd imagine like this would be a really, really helpful thing to be able to reintegrate one's own personality after having it kind of put on the back burner, or more like mothballed, is essentially what happens. Like Thomas, you're saying, once you go into boot camp, it's like you destruction of your own personal identity, and having the identity of the Marine Corps, the identity of the Navy, the Army, the Air Force put into you, and you're no longer operating on your own self-determinism. But like you're saying, Thomas, that when you go through a tour of duty, whether it's a tour of duty in combat or a tour of duty as a non-deployed troop, you're dealing with a lot of things deep within yourself that you never knew were there, because your own personality has been pushed to the side. So that stuff comes up in strange ways.
About 10 years ago, I did a talk in Leicester. Just remind me of something then, Jason. I did a talk in Leicester, and this young lad came up to me afterwards, and I could tell he wasn't right. He was a damaged. You could tell he was a good, very good looking young guy. But you could tell just by his body language, you'd say you tell me someone's hurting inside. And we just started talking, and it told me that, Thomas, I don't think I'm me anymore. And I says, well, what do you mean by that? And he went on to tell me about, he was in the Gulf War. He was in the Royal Marines. And so I got the impression of putting two and two together that he'd been through some terrible things that had wrecked him at the beginning of his life, because he was probably over there when he was 19 and stuff like that. But I would imagine that someone like Siofra's work, like you're saying, Jason, would be so helpful to those ex-service people. Do you do online courses, Siofra?
Well, this is what I'm thinking of now developing, because to be honest, these days it's really hard to get actual physical bums on seats, in my own area or whatever. So I'm thinking of just learning how to do a kind of pre-recorded courses and doing it like that, or else doing live ones, that people can access online. During the lockdowns, I also run the heroine's journey, and that's another story, but I ran heroes and heroines' journeys through the lockdowns, and they did do well. But then I tried to get it back into reality, physical world. But people are so odd these days.
Can we talk about, I know you have this confidentiality thing, but vaguely, can you tell us what it was like working with people during the lockdown? That must have been an interesting experience. Like, what would generalized, give us generalizations now, not individual cases, but like, what was things you noticed about people? Were they damaged in some collective way?
Well, we see when we were just doing like these live workshops on Zoom, they actually were so hungry for contact that it worked really, really well. And it's like, even though you've got these stupid square boxes everywhere, it was like a circle, and it really worked. And people were opening up, and they needed this so badly, and whatever, it was great. It's when you meet people after the lockdowns that you see the effect, and you see people coming in extremely paranoid with masks on, saying, "Oh no, I couldn't give people a lift. They'd have to be vaccinated." And I go, "Whatever. I'm not asking anybody their personal medical information." But then you notice because a lot of people I know who would come to the workshops would be totally on the other page. They just sort of by osmosis just relaxed and started ripping off their masks, which was really nice to see.
It's beautiful, actually. It's a beautiful thing. That's happened to me just in regular conversation.
Yeah.
People, I used to have these Saturday morning meetups during the whole thing in an outdoor coffee shop.
Yeah. I've heard about those.
None of us wore masks. And eventually people all around us were all masked up to the 90s. And as the more they saw us laughing and joking and talking and other things and smiles on our faces, you see them did this. It was like the world had given them permission to take it off, rather than like some propaganda thing on the evening news.
Sure.
I found that very powerful, actually, to see that.
Yeah.
And it wasn't monkey see, monkey do. They genuinely were like that kind of thing.
Well, yeah, I think that's been happening, since whatever these restrictions have been lifted or whatever. But you see, we kept going. When you started your tribe thing down there, I decided to start one here where I live as well. And it got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And everybody was just having a great time. I arranged to go out for meals to places that didn't have the bullshit going on, and, parties, and got on with it. That's why I'm not fucked up after it, because I just kept going.
I know, it's wonderful how that all took off all over the world. What town were you meeting up in Wicklow?
It's just a little place called Kilcool, which if you kind of blinked, you might miss, but it's not far from me. I used to walk down the field and we'd all meet outside.
Years ago, we were making a movie. It was with Aidan Killian up in the Wicklow Mountains there. And it was in a kind of a retreat. I thought it was Buddhist or whatever, but it was a beautiful place up, Wicklow's huge, so it was way up. And parts of it are quite remote, but it was up in the mountains there, and it was absolutely paradise. And I'm just wondering, I know there's quite a few places like that up there, but when you mentioned that, it reminded me of the place I stayed in for a weekend.
It might have been a place up in Glendalough or something.
No, it was further. It was deeper into Wicklow. I think at Glendalough, I think that's very close to Dublin. It was way, way.
Okay.
Past Hollywood. It was like,
there's a lot of hidden little retreat places like that Hero's Journey Gestalt thing that I was mentioning, that's actually down in Kiltegan, and I think there's a couple of retreaty places down there. I did a few workshops down that way, and yeah.
So when you're doing your workshops, do people go to your house, or do you hire places, or how do you do it?
Well, I was teaching from the Navarra Centre in Bray for a few years, and then they said to me in September 2020, "We can have 4 people." I said, "Yeah, well, that's the end of that. Goodbye." So it didn't make any sense. So I started to do it from home, and I work also from the Matcha Yoga Studio in Bray, which is a beautiful space. So I'm actually running a haiku workshop there on Sunday. And I'm also running a hero's journey from home. And then I'm going to stop for the summer and just work on my own writing and stuff.
Any books planned or anything?
Well, I've got this novel that, as I mentioned it earlier, that is set in 12th century France. So that's kind of like a historical fantasy, because I bring in magic into that, because I like real history infused with magic. So that's, I do load of research into the thing, and then I bring some other stuff into it that changes the story a little bit, but also gives some other depth of meaning. So that book is called Dark Forest. So I'm trying to get that book out there now, and I might write it as a script or something. And I'd also like to write more, because like she fascinates me, Eleanor of Aquitaine, and that whole thing, because of their connection to the Arthurian legends, and she's very connected to the Grail with all these crusade stuff and all that. It's amazing stuff. So
have you studied magic or anything like that, or have you a big interest in that stuff?
Not an awful lot. No, I had a kind of Reiki teacher who taught me a good bit, actually. She's in the north now. And I guess I was a Tibetan Buddhist for like 20 years, but then I guess I thought, well, it is another religion at the end of the day. When I was in Sri Lanka, I felt like it was the Catholic. No, there's a lot of things I like about it, of course, but I felt like it was the Catholicism of the East. I was much more drawn to Hinduism. Me too, yeah. And I had loads of like Tibetan friends and Thai monk friends, because when I was living there, I was hanging out with the Thai monks a lot, and then we all went up to Darjeeling, and I was studying in a Tibetan school up there, and I was staying with a Tibetan family. And then I go up to the Mahakal Hill. The Mahakal Hill is like this hybrid intersection of Hinduism and Buddhism. So like Kali temple is also Palden Lamo temple, or you know what I mean? It's all kind of, the deities are interchangeable. And so much of Tibetan Buddhism came from India as well. And I go into a little temple, and the Thai monks would pull me out going, "Sister, what you doing? Go there, don't go there." It's like, what are you doing? Like, I'm in India, and I love Hindu temples.
Yeah. I was fascinated by the Hindu temples, where out in the, you have all the inside, all the different, have Kali and Shiva and all the things inside it. Yeah. And on the forecourt, you'd often have a grotto with Jesus and Virgin Mary. Next to that, the Buddha. So there was like, I love the fact that you could that the way Hindus incorporate archetypes from other religions. Because when you go to Sri Lanka, you see paintings of Jesus everywhere, and next to Shiva and next to Kali. It's very healthy, it's like a very healthy approach. It's like, oh, I like this aspect of his archetype. I'm incorporating into my own belief. Yeah,
totally. Because like you'd see Jesus in a Hindu temple, you go, what's he doing there? Well, he is an avatar of,
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
because they never did that with Muhammad.
No. Well, there's a whole other history there that you could dwell on that. But let's not go there. So I can't believe how fast that hour went. Thank you. This has been fantastic. Jason, do you have any final questions for Siofra?
I was just going to say, Siofra, if you do ever find yourself speaking to veterans and you need any advice about that or any direction for it, I think I'd love to talk with you about it. It would be something very, very, very beneficial for veterans, combat and otherwise.
That would be amazing. Really do something online. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, because the stuff that they give to troops in their last couple weeks of active duty, they have a transitional seminar type of thing that they'll call transition assistance program, or some kind of acronym like that, TAPS class. And it's all incredibly figure based. Do this, don't do this, don't do this. And it's very, there's no human aspect to it. And it doesn't really help anyone out. But if there were some kind of program out there that were advertised to,
definitely. I've been doing a lot of military stuff in the last 6 months, because I wrote a book about Kevin Barry, who was a great uncle of mine who was hanged by the British. So it's kind of his short life. He was hanged at 18. And I found all these other papers that belonged to my grandfather, who's a big guy in the IRA. So I've been working on military stuff for the last 6 months, and I'm really done with it. But that is such a hero's journey, like his story, you know.
Kevin Barry was your great uncle.
Yeah. So it just fell upon me to write a book about him because my dad had written a book about him, and then I found all this other material. My dad died in 2009. I said I'm going to get his book republished, but I ended up doing one myself. And then my granddad had written this unpublished book that I was looking for years, and finally it ended up in UCD archives. If I say anything else, I'll get into trouble because family politics.
Yeah, it's this weird synchronicity because only 2 weeks ago I was reading about Kevin Barry.
Oh yeah,
and I had no idea that. Well, he was 19, or when the British hung him.
18, yeah.
18. That he was capped as a rugby player for Ireland. I never even knew that.
Yeah, he was in Belvedere College. I mean, he's kind of an anomaly because, you know, this posh Belvedere boy ends up, you know, fighting in the IRA. And yeah, it was an interesting story.
He went to Belvedere. Yeah, I was quite surprised. He was a very different. I had this impression growing up. He was like a Dublin street kid. No, he was very much from the establishment.
Yeah. Yeah, no, he totally was. And had he lived, I would say he probably would have become a nice little middle-class doctor, you know.
It's a tragic story on so many levels, though, but it really
But he did have unbelievable courage. He really did.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it happened up in Fisborough, didn't it, where the attack happened. He was hiding under the...
It was just behind the forecourts. It was on Church Street.
Church Street, yeah.
There used to be a plaque there. Yeah.
Well, that's fascinating. So... do you have anything, Siofra, coming up soon that you'd like to promote in terms of courses or anything?
Well, just for the moment, I only have the haiku workshop, which is on Sunday in the Matcha Yoga Studio in Braille. I'll send you details about that. And then I'm going to be looking at developing my courses to go more online and stuff like that. And I'd love to look into the veteran guys as well. And I'm hoping to also the Kevin Barry thing. I've done a project already and I've worked a lot in the prisons, but they were all through writing the Kevin Barry book. I was working in Portlaoise prison with the political prisons in there. And there's supposed to be a launch of the paperback. The paperback of the Kevin Barry book is coming out because it's totally revised and amazing material from my granddad's stuff has come out because granddad was interesting because he brought Nazi spies into Ireland and he did all sorts of interesting things. And he married Kevin Barry's sister, who was my grandmother. So that's coming out. That paperback is coming out in September with Currick Books. So that's something that's coming out as well.
Well, this has been fantastic. Thanks for coming. I might be seeing you anywhere later on in the year. Was it?
Yeah, it's somewhere in Collinstown for the new media thing. Yeah. Yeah,
so I might be seeing you there. But this was a great hour. We'll definitely have to have you back on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Little deeper dive. Your website is
www.siofraodonovan.com, Siofra O'Donovan.com.
Well, Jason will put a barrier on the bottom of the screen.
And where are you, Jason?
I'm up in the Pacific Northwest of the U.S. in Eastern Washington.
Okay. Haven't been there. Lived in New York for a while, but haven't been there. My granny was from Dallas, Texas.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Fascinating. So, Siofra, thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Thomas and Jason.
Wonderful hour. Jason, thanks again for running the show. Everybody else, well, that was a great hour. I'm sure everyone agrees, and you'll get a lot from this. And again, if you need anything in terms of contacting Siofra, maybe online courses down the road or anything, or a book from Amazon, don't be afraid to get in contact. The email address will be on the website, won't it?
Yeah, it'll be there. I'll send you all those details. Thanks so much.
You're welcome. And
great to meet you finally, even on a screeny thing.
And likewise, because it's funny, like as soon as I read that post, it's like one of those things, oh, I like this person.
Yeah.
You know, you have those kind of moments. And so everyone else, thank you for watching the latest BR313 Symposium, and we'll see you next time, and look after yourselves and take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.